Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I almost took as a joke question, but when I really thought about it, I'm like, this is an interesting question on a philosophical level. So let me flip it in right here, and he basically wants to know if he takes this SARM, is he still natural? Now, let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that. Now, a quick summary for those who do not know what a SARM is. SARM stand for Selective Androgen Receptor Modulators. That means they act like an androgen, bind to the androgen receptor in some tissues in the body, and in other tissues they do not. And in this case, most SARMs that people are doing are hopefully they're binding to the androgen receptors in your muscle tissue. Maybe also, if you're lucky, you get a good one in your bone tissue also, because androgens can cause improved bone density. They can make your bones stronger, not just your muscles bigger. And the reason that's important, because that is a pathway through which anabolic steroids and testosterone also make muscles grow. They bind to the androgen receptor, the male hormone receptors in your muscle tissue. So SARMs, in theory, if they work the way they're supposed to, and they don't always, should give the primary muscle building component of anabolics with less side effects. Now, that's the whole concept behind it. Not always true in practice, but here's the question that we got to look at. When someone asks that, since it's not a true anabolic steroid, are they still natural? Well, if we want to be serious and just take it at face value, the obvious answer would be no, you dumbass, of course not. Of course you're not natural. You're putting a synthetic substance into your body that replicates at the cellular level in the muscle what an anabolic steroid does. There's nothing natural about that. But this term natural, or natty, when we stop and look at it, is such a vaguely and ill-defined term with so many gray areas that it's not always that clear-cut and dry. And I want people to stop and think about that. How do we define natural? Because I've had one guy who was drug-free, was working on his biochemistry degree, who said, look, natural means you either take anabolic steroids or you don't. Other anabolic drugs don't count. You take growth hormone, you're still natural because it's not an anabolic steroid. Take a peptide, it's not an anabolic steroid. This is pretty straightforward. Now, he was saying that as someone who I believe was testing and competing and tested powerlifting at the time too, was working on his biochemistry degree, was legitimately not interested in taking drugs. He didn't even take peptides or any of that. But that was just his opinion. But you know what? The term changes a lot. The whole term natural is historically a buzzword used to sell products. All right, this shampoo is natural. This food is all natural. See what I mean? It's used to make it sound like it's good because it's based upon the naturalistic fallacy that what's natural must be good and healthy. So that's why the term was picked up by the bodybuilding world, because it's a buzzword. They could sell natural bodybuilding, which really they meant drug-free or steroid-free. That's what they actually meant. But it's been redefined several times. And what I mean is, all right, since we're talking natural just kind of means whatever people want it to mean, they had to define it quite a bit for bodybuilding purposes in order to give it a meaning inside the rules. But the problem is that over the last 15 years, several natural bodybuilding federations have redefined it. So the people who determine what natural bodybuilding actually means at a competitive level have redefined it. Like, for example, a lot of pro hormones were allowed at a certain time. A bunch of those federations allowed, say, Superdrol to be used because it was classified as an over-the-counter pro hormone at the time. So since it was a legal supplement, they allowed it. But when the FDA decided it was an anabolic steroid, and for the record, Superdrol is a true anabolic steroid. It's not a pro-hormone. It's not a precursor. It is a legitimate anabolic steroid, and it is actually milligram per milligram much stronger than most other anabolic steroids. It is a very, very powerful anabolic steroid, and a very toxic one at that too. Even though it was sold over the counter, it is both stronger and more toxic to your body than a lot of the felony possession anabolics were at the time, that were illegal to have at the same time it was legal and over the counter, which is, doesn't make a lot of sense, but the world and laws don't always make a lot of sense now, do they? They're not always well thought out. Lawmakers do their best sometimes, but they don't always really think this shit through properly, or they're not always educated when they write things. Most of us realize this. I mean, the mere fact that alcohol is legal and stuff like marijuana is illegal in most countries should tell you something there in terms of them not assessing risk. But I digress. So the question becomes, at that time, people who took Superdrol were natural by the rules of all those federations. They were a natural bodybuilder. In 2003, if you took Superdrol, you would be considered a natural bodybuilder for all purposes, even though you were taking an extremely powerful anabolic steroid, because it wasn't legally defined as an anabolic steroid yet, over-the-counter product. Well, we get into these other topics of, well, if something is naturally occurring, then it doesn't really count. You know, people start to argue these things. People actually argue that if they take a replacement dose of testosterone, right, a replacement dose of testosterone, that they're natural. Some federations will allow it, some don't. You see what I mean? This is a gray area. Studies do, however, show that people who take a replacement dose of testosterone gain muscle faster than people who produce the same peak levels on their own without an injection. So a replacement dose of testosterone is actually superior to every over-the-counter supplement in the world for muscle building. Let me state that again. Every single product right now that's available over the counter as a muscle building supplement is weaker than a replacement dose of testosterone. It's weaker than TRT is for building muscle. Some people will define TRT as natural, but it's a synthetic hormone being used to replace your natural levels, but it's stronger than your natural testosterone when we study it in labs in muscle growth. Is that natural? I don't know. I would say if we're talking about from that perspective of putting a synthetic substance in your body that has a muscle building effect, if that's how you define unnatural, then I would have to say it's not natural no matter what a rule says. So you got to define this term. And then people say, well, but if it's naturally occurring, it doesn't count even if it builds muscle, like creatine. Okay, most people, I don't think creatine works, and I know that goes against the science, I know it goes against the studies, but I have never watched an individual go on creatine and replicate the results that were done in studies. Like no one I've ever trained with, no one I've ever worked with, have I watched who'd never use creatine, take it the first time and get what the studies say it does. Yeah, I'm a non-responder. The studies say 30% of the population are non-responders to creatine. I've never seen it do anything in my life. Nothing, zero, zip, zilch, no effect. I don't even gain a half a pound of water when I took a loading dose. I have never seen anyone take creatine who I personally knew who their lifts went up significantly, anything like what the studies show. So clearly everyone I've ever met falls in that 30% of non-responders, like everyone I've watched who went on it. I don't think it works, but the studies say it does. So, I mean, I can't refute those studies. I can only say that maybe I've only met the 20 people I've watched over the years who do this were all within that 30% of non-responders. Just weird luck. But based upon my experience, I don't feel like it works no matter what the studies say. And I could be wrong. Maybe the studies have been biased. Maybe they're right, and I've just had weird luck with the people I've met. I don't know. I have to accept that possibility. But creatine, in the form that people take it in, is not naturally occurring. That's like saying testosterone is naturally occurring. Well, it is, but testosterone cypionate isn't. That you're injecting or putting a synthetic form of testosterone into your body, and it's not that the testosterone is synthetic. That doesn't matter. Body can't tell those apart. There is no difference. Testosterone is testosterone. It's the molecule, the ester, that they've attached to it to time release it into the body and get it into the body effectively. Well, how about creatine? Are you taking creatine? No, you're not taking straight creatine any more than you're injecting straight testosterone. You're taking creatine monohydrate. There's other forms of it also, but the idea is the same. It is a time release factor to allow the substance to get through your GI tract more effectively than creatine found in foods gets through. It's basically synthetically enhanced creatine that has a documented muscle and strength building effect in a laboratory. If we use the same criteria that we use to say that testosterone, that TRT, isn't natural, then we would also have to say someone taking creatine is not natural. The only reason we can say someone on creatine is natural if we use the old definition, the one that says that any legal over-the-counter substance that you can get without a prescription still makes you natural. Okay, that old description also allowed Superdrol to be natural. Anyone who took Superdrol during those years, and that was the case, was natural and would still be considered natural today if you go back. If creatine suddenly gets regulated, you become not natural if you're taking creatine. You see the problem here? How about insulin? If we use that same logic, insulin, an insanely anabolic drug, people can walk in and buy insulin without a prescription. It's used to treat diabetics, but it is a documented anabolic drug. It is a very dangerous drug. I don't advocate that anyone ever use it, including people, even bodybuilders. I recommend they don't take it. I think it is too dangerous to take. But it's an anabolic drug. It can be bought over the counter without a prescription. So, at what point, how do we define this? Where do we draw the line? What do we determine what's natural and not? And so people worry about it a lot, but you know what my point is? Why do you care? Like, why do people need to define themselves as natural or not? It's purely a buzzword to sell products. There is actually no reason for you to define yourself or give a single fuck if you are natural or not, unless you're trying to sell a product. And you know what? Here's the thing. Everyone who's trying to sell products based on their natural status uses drugs anyways and just fucking lies. So ultimately, there's no reason to ever define natty. Like, why would you need to? The only purpose in defining yourself as natty or not, or determining it, is to sell a product or a service to convince people who don't use drugs that your product is good. And the best strategy to do that is to use anabolic steroids, growth hormone, and all that, and just fucking lie about it and call yourself natural anyways. That's the most proven strategy ever for that anyways, because modern standards have all been set by people who are on drugs anyway. So if you're not on drugs, you're probably not going to be impressive enough to convince anyone that your product is good for a natural. Unless you've obtained drug-like results from it, from what they can tell, then you're not even a very good natty. So we're in such a skewed world with so many gray areas, and the term itself is really meaningless outside of a marketing buzzword. So my question to people who try to sit there and figure out if they're natural or not, do you see what a headache and circle you can go through trying to define it the way that I just did and looked at it? Because it's a meaningless, ambiguous term full of gray areas. It has no real meaning. It's an arbitrary term, okay? And because it's an arbitrary term, you don't need to sit around and worry about it and try to figure it out. And remember, everyone who defines themselves as natural to sell a product just fucking lies. So if you're going to do that, you just do the same thing anyways. Does it really matter? You know what I would say? Just say to yourself this way: hey, do I want to use whatever substance it is or not? Do I want to weigh out the risk versus reward of this substance and base it that way? Instead of defining yourself as natural or running around talking about it, it's a pointless word, guys. Don't even worry about it, honestly. If you are a grown adult and you feel the risk versus reward to steroids are worth it to you to do what you want with your own body, I don't care. If you don't feel they're worth it, and for most of you they probably aren't worth it, then don't use steroids. It's real simple. It's real simple. If the legal and health and financial costs or risk of taking a substance are not worth it to you, don't do it. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? But this whole term natural, it's fucking stupid, and it's an arbitrary buzzword. It's used to sell products. That's the only reason anyone even uses that term. And if you're not selling products, there's no point in you even trying to figure out if you're natural or not. But to ask the idea of if taking a SARM, a substance that works through the same pathway that anabolic steroids do, is natural, yeah, only if taking anabolic steroids is natural too. Because it pretty much is doing the same thing in the body. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.